Welcome to Profiles of Endurance. I'm Father Scott Vanderveer. Many of the most faith-filled people we meet were not always that way. It's quite common that someone who feels very in love with God and wants to share the joy that they feel from their faith with others often went through a period of time where faith wasn't important to them. And it's the contrast between life with God versus life ignoring God that causes them to feel so alive in the spiritual life that they've chosen. That's the case with today's guest. Christa Desrosiers was not always a woman of deep faith, though now she's arranged her life primarily around the will of God as it's been revealed to her. But strong faith did not protect her from misfortune. Several years ago, Christa went through a health crisis that threatened her life and caused her to think deeply about what it would mean for her to leave her 4 children and husband behind. The community rallied around her, and the support she received has filled her with increased joy and appreciation for the people in her life. But no one showed up more than God. Listen to this remarkable conversation between a faithful mother, wife, and church minister and her pastor about just how much God can show up at the darkest times when we need to see God's face the most. Let's start at the very beginning of the journey. Talk a little bit about your family life and what faith and family was like growing up.
Okay. Hi, Father Scott. Good to chat today.
Great to chat.
So just in a nutshell, my mother was a very devout Catholic, raised in the Massachusetts area with a family of 7 children. Her mother was very devout. But in my younger years, I remember her as being devout, but very rules-oriented. We were devout because it was the thing we were supposed to do. My father was born in Europe and lived through the war and had a very great childhood, about up to the age of 15, and then difficult for 3 years with the ravages of war, I guess, and decided to come to the States and was actually sponsored by Catholic Charities. His faith, though, was a Christian Easter kind of Catholic. He went because my mother, said he should. And he went to reconciliation once a year because it was the rule. And but he fully supported, if my mother said the kids need to do this for church, then we did it for church. And he said that in Europe, what he remembers as a child is the men and the women would all go to church in their horse and buggies, and they would drop the women off, and the men would sit on the park benches and just kind of catch up on the week until the women were done. So, that was his experience, and so that's what he brought here. But, always a very honest and later years, I learned he had a pretty deep faith, but it wasn't expressed by going to church and things like that.
Where were you in the family? Like, so growing up with this European dad and this faith-filled kind of religious rules-focused mom, where were you in the midst of family life?
Right. So I am one of 8 children, and but there was a brother who was older than me that I never knew that died when he was 2. And I was number 7 out of the 8.
Wow, near the end.
Yeah, so 5 boys, 4 that survived, and then 3 girls.
Wow. And so did you take after more your mother's approach to faith or your father's?
Definitely my mother's, just because it was, in our family, it did seem to be a little bit of a, the boys kind of, my father was responsible for the discipline and things of the boys, and my mother was responsible for the girls. So I think we just all naturally leaned more towards her characteristics, and my brothers I don't think it was a gender thing. I think it was just who we all spent more time with.
You wound up going off for a career in the Army and lived all over the world, including, now, did you go back to your father's home country?
I did. Yes, I did.
You lived in Germany, you lived in Korea, you were other places as well. What was that experience like for you, and where was God in that experience for you?
I loved that experience. That was first and foremost. It was a great experience, a great career, very much a learning experience as far as, how the rest of the world lives. I'm sure that God was in every single second of that, but there were not very many parts of that I allowed him to be in. More in college and my early years in the Army. There's chapels on every post. There's chaplains who reach out. And I was, just in and out. It was more a matter of convenience and how much I wanted to be involved. There was a point where he was not involved at all, and my life was sort of spiraling in a very negative place. And I was actually deployed to Panama at the time, and I remember a young female single captain who was, I guess what I looked at her was, she was in the exact same boat as I was, but for some reason she managed to, instead of spending her time deployed drinking and carousing, she spent her time being a big sister to an orphan and going to church. And so she after that deployment, I decided that, I really want God and church back in my life. I didn't really know how to do that. I did pray for God to send me, I said, if you don't want me to be this crazy person that I have become, you need to send somebody to help me through this. And very shortly after, I met my now husband, Bob, who is a very faith-filled man. And also in the Army, and he played in the folk group at church. So a good friend of mine said, if you really want to meet a godly man, you should go back to church and ask to join the singing group, because Bob Desrosiers sings, and he's single, so he seems like a nice guy. So the rest is history, as they say.
And it's an amazing story, because he by no means expected that he would inevitably get married. Is that right? Marriage was not an inevitable thing for him.
No, he went from considering the priesthood in college. He went to a Catholic college to kind of, he did have some serious relationships, but he just had kind of been resigned to the fact that, well, whatever. If I get married, great. If I don't, on our first brunch when I was sort of, thinking, this might be a possibility. His comment was, I never really saw myself as a white picket fence kind of guy. And I remember looking out the window and thinking, really, God? Really? This is where you're taking me now? But,
wow.
But shortly after that, we dated a very long time, and I was kind of in a hurry. I was like, I really am ready to get married or not get married. And he was not ready to get married at first. And I can remember one day being very distraught and just praying, God, if this is right, just let me know right now, because I need a sign and I need a big one. And completely dry, rain-free day, and I looked up in the sky, and there was just a huge rainbow. And so I said, okay, all right, that's big. That's it. So. Where were you?
Where were you at that stage? What country were you in?
I was still at Fort Drum, actually.
Wow, in the northern part of New York State.
Yeah, so we were very early in our relationship, but because it was another probably 4.5 years before we were engaged even, so I really had to always go back to that rainbow moment and be like, okay, right?
You sure did. Yeah, that you said you were in a hurry, but that's a different time frame than the normal hurry.
Yeah.
Wow. Christa, if I might, I'd love to ask you about when you first saw that other servicewoman who had a similar post, but who was living her priorities differently. She was volunteering as a big sister, and she was going to church. What was it that allowed you to make the shift? Because most people, especially at that age of life, even if we're not in a good place, we usually, some part of us defends where we are. We say, well, these are my choices and nobody has the right to tell me. What was it that nudged you, do you think? Were you starting to recognize that you weren't very happy with the direction you were in?
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to peg it. I was realizing that I was not, I would wake up different places, different situations, and think, what am I doing? This is not. And he just exuded such a joy.
Wow.
And there was, I was like, there's nothing in her life that if I said, oh, what did you do today, that she couldn't tell me everything she had done without any shame or worrying about, I was like, she's making every decision, in a positive way. Whereas if somebody asked me, if my mother had called me and said, what did you do last night? It would have to be filtered.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So she was, her life and her joy was just so attractive. I said, that is what I want to be. That's what yeah.
Joy attracts. Joy attracts. And the other thing I'm thinking is a phrase that I have always found true in my life, that there is not a single pillow you could ever rest your head on that is as soft as a clean conscience.
Right.
Not having to cover your tracks feels so relaxing after making different. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you and Bob got married and you came back to the States in time, and you got established in a sweet little town called Coxsackie, New York. And you had 4 children in fairly rapid succession. How many kids in how many years?
Yeah, we were in Germany. I was still on active duty, and we had Charlie. And Bob had just retired, taken an early retirement. But I knew as soon as we married that if we had a child, I would be ready to leave active duty. And then I had Regina 22 months later, and Therese 2.5 years later, and Catherine 2 years later. So Charlie was just 6 when I had Catherine.
Wow. So and so the first baby was in 1997.
99.
Oh, 90. Oh, it was 99. 99.
Charlie was 99, yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And then by 2005, you had your youngest.
Yes. Yep.
Wow. So then you've got small kids at home, and you're homeschooling them. Was that from the very beginning? You were homeschooling your children?
Yes. Yep. I just a woman in Germany had said something to me about because I was involved in. She was like a coach for a Leche League for breastfeeding, and she said, "Oh, you're going to go back to the States and homeschool." And I remember looking at her and saying, That's not a thing. I don't even know what you're talking about." But we came back, and as Charlie became, school age, and all my peers started talking about the pre-K screening, and I just started to kind of say, I think we're going to wait a year. And we just kept waiting a year, and now we've waited 16 years, so we're pretty sure we're going to continue to do it.
Absolutely. And you've had your kids. You've had 2 kids now. 2 kids now graduate.
Yes. Yep.
And they're on to really great adult lives, and still, works in progress, as we all are, but they're transitioning well into adulthood. So it's
thank you for noticing that.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely to see. It truly is. Now, as often happens in life, just when things are rolling along and we think we understand what the next couple chapters are going to look like, everything falls apart. And yay. In 2012, you had one of those falling apart moments. What happened?
So earlier 2012, my mother actually, it's kind of a two-part story, but she came back from Florida from wintering there, and to make a long story short, she declined rapidly, and nobody could tell us why. She literally went from driving her own car and living independently, being the medical taxi for all of the senior citizens, to being unable to speak, to walk, to do daily functions on her own within literally like 6 weeks.
Wow.
So that was in the spring, and I was her primary health proxy and caretaker. I became that. So we went through the summer and the fall with just dealing with her situation, which caused me, looking back, to miss all of my annual appointments, my medical things. And sometime late November, mid to late November, I discovered a lump in my left breast. So I went to my doctor for my annual exam in early December, and as much as people said, "Oh, it's nothing," as soon as the nurse practitioner took out the little measuring thing and said, "Well, let's just take some measurements and then make an appointment for some further studies," I said, "Oh, this is probably not good." So, yeah, I had a lot going on, and I also had something on my thyroid, and I had an enlarged lymph node that was problematic. So sent me home the next several days, some tests, and on the 18th of December in the morning, my surgeon called and just over the phone said, she said, "Yep, the biopsies are back. It's an aggressive form of breast cancer, and we need to start getting you in for some appointments." So I said, "Okay, thank you for telling me, and I'll wait for the next call." Got off the phone, and Bob and I then did our once-a-year annual Christmas shopping that we had scheduled for the day.
You're kidding.
No, that's what we did, and but it actually was perfect because we had planned to be out of the house to do that anyhow, and it gave us a chance to just be like, okay, how are we going to do this, and decide some important things, like we're not going to tell the kids until after Christmas. Let's just, get through Christmas and then figure it out. So, yeah, that's how we spent that day.
Wow. Yeah. Talk to me. You've gotten, over the course of these decades, you've gotten to know yourself pretty well. Is that a pretty typical response? You pulled your socks up and you just went forward. Is that kind of how you operate to get through hard things?
Yeah. I mean, my father was, German, and
Yes.
my mother is very German also. And I grew up on a dairy farm, not wealthy. It's just what you did. My father's education was probably an 8th grade education, and yet he was just the most capable, most intelligent man, really, that I've probably ever met. And his, it was just, okay, this happened. How do we solve it? I tell my kids now, be a problem solver. It's okay to be like upset or sad,
Yes.
but then quickly shift into the problem solve mode. And so it was pretty normal.
Wow. Your husband, different personality and different family of origin. How did he respond?
He's, the blessing was he knew that as much as it involved more than me, that this was my thing. This was, and his reaction was, as was the best, was, what do I need to do to support you and get you through this? So yeah, he's also not he's a worrier. Sometimes we call him Eeyore because he tends to be more on the worried side, but it's just because he's also a problem solver, but just in a different way,
Yeah.
So.
Wow. And it's in moments like this that our earlier choice of who we married really, really counts. And it was one of those times you saw you did well. How did you tell the kids?
So I had a bunch of appointments, like rapid fire. Unfortunately, it was the holidays. So the schedule was a little bit hectic because Bob was at the church and I was the director for the Christmas pageant. But it was also a little bit flexible because it was around the holidays. So the kids knew I was coming and going, and so finally after New Year's, we decided, okay, I've got to tell them now. And because our son Charlie, the oldest, number one, because he was a boy, and he handles things a little bit differently. He tends to have a little more anxiety than the girls. So I planned to tell all the girls together, and Bob went somewhere with Charlie that day. So we made it a movie day, and we were just all hanging out with movies. And after one of the movies, I said, "Okay, Mom's got to tell you guys something." I said, you know, I've had a lot of appointments, and one of my girls said, "We know, Mom. We think you're pregnant."
Oh.
And I said, in my head, I was like, boy, I wish that was the news I was giving to you.
Big time.
So I said, no, actually, that would be good news. I said, but instead it's, I have something called breast cancer, and I kind of explained it to them. And each one, it's one of my favorite memories, actually, of the whole thing. Each one of them reacted completely differently, but completely perfectly for their personalities. And, Regina, who my oldest daughter, is very, very calm, and she was kind of like, okay, can we watch the next movie now? Yes, and Therese, my sensitive one, just grabbed a blanket, put her head under it, and started to cry.
Oh.
And Catherine, my baby, who, of course, being the baby, and she had nursed very late in her life, and so she used to kind of jokingly say that I had Lucky Lefty and Ralphie Righty. And as only Catherine could do, she said, well, where is it? And I said, well, it's, in my left breast. And she said, I guess Lucky Lefty's not so lucky after all.
Oh my gosh. Every personality on full display.
Yeah.
Wow. That's not so lucky Lefty.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
And Charlie, then when we told Charlie a little bit later, he just, because he's a very black and white thinker, he just said, wait, people die from cancer. And we said, yeah. He said, are you going to die? And I said, I'm going to die someday. We all are. But I don't believe that I'm going to die from this cancer at this time in my life. So he's like, okay, so.
Yeah. What was the doctor telling you about what to expect from this cancer?
I had kind of decided early on and put a burden on Bob that I'm not sure he, wanted to accept, but I said, I really don't want, I knew that cancer had stages, and prognosis, and I told him, I don't want to be the one that hears any of that stuff. So you're going to have to listen to those statistics and not tell me unless I ask you to tell me.
Wow.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to fight and beat this cancer. And that's kind of, and then I did have my first doctor, oncologist, sort of just started busting out with some stats. And we left the office, and Bob and I looked at him and I said, I'm going to get a different oncologist. He's not, he's not what I need.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I didn't really focus on that, prognosis, and it was just, what are we going to do? What's the next thing we have to do? What's the next thing?
Which is true to your problem-solving nature. Yeah.
Right.
How did you feel at that point? Did you feel like someone who was sick?
No. I was actually, in good shape. I was, it was, and that's the strangest part, because you're like, would never have known I had cancer if I had not found a lump, you know.
What were your earlier experiences of cancer in your life with other people? Was cancer something that had been a part of your life?
Mostly through people that we knew through the church or the community. I didn't really have close other than my father died of lung cancer in 2001. But he was a lifelong smoker, and it wasn't ever really a surprise for any of us. So I guess the hard part was I had walked pretty closely with him through that because I was, not working full time at the time, and I was very flexible. So it's not a pleasant thing to watch somebody's walk through that, especially when it doesn't end well. So
yes,
yeah.
You said you told Bob, I'm gonna fight. So don't tell me anything I don't need to know. I'll ask you if I need to know it, and I'm gonna fight. What does that mean? As somebody who's never had cancer but has thought about it many times, has known people who've had it, what does it feel like to fight cancer?
I'm sure, I think the reason I really didn't want to know statistics or because I had heard probably somewhere, or I just decided I really don't want, if it's bad news, I don't want to know that until I really need to, because I want every fiber of me to just be thinking good thoughts, only good thoughts. Tell me good. I did very early on drive around town and make a point to think about people in the community who had cancer years ago, and think about how many years ago they had it, and think, oh, that's Jen Leonardo. She's been almost 20 years, and Donna Ansbacher, she's getting ready to be 20 years, and MJ Willis. So I focused on people I knew who had cancer and were still here.
Yeah. When you look back at that time, I know from just hearing, I've never had this conversation with you about this before, but I know from talking with your family, it was in some ways the best of times and the worst of times. You experienced some beautiful moments with the community and in your lives, and you also experienced some of the hardest. Maybe we'll end on a sweeter note. What was hard about that period? What are the hard memories?
Actually, the hardest part for me was the day that I got the call that I needed to have further testing from the gynecologist's office. I was sitting with one of my sisters waiting for my mother to get done with a procedure to find out what her real issue was. And I remember on the 18th when I got the call that it was definitely cancer, one of my early calls was to my sister and my other siblings, and I just said, I can't do mom. I need a year, I think, and I have to do me right now. So, and it was very difficult because I, knew all of the ins and outs of her medical, and I didn't want to abandon her, but I also knew that if she was in her mind enough to know what was going on, she would want me to do that. So,
yes.
So kind of being separated from that process and was a negative. Well, that was a down.
Yeah.
But I think there's just too many heartwarming memories to really, the community coming together.
Remarkable outpouring of love from the community.
Right. The meals, the cards. Some people, you've had Peggy Quigley on here, and she used to send me a card, I don't know, every few weeks. And what I loved about them were they were the most ridiculous, not sappy, borderline irreverent sometimes cards. And they were the best, and she was like, I hope you don't mind. And I was like, I love your cards. So, and just being able, we decided very early on that even though I knew it would be difficult, that I wanted to keep the kids home. I didn't want to send them to school. I wanted to do what I could to continue homeschooling. And so having them here, because I knew that I always say that my kids are my oxygen. And, on the days through chemo, and if I had been home alone and not been able to hear them and just be surrounded by them, even though I was not with them because I'd be on the couch completely out, I know that that's what got me through those days.
Wow.
And just, probably the most touching one, the one that came right to mind, was Therese, who was 9 at the time. When my hair fell out, he was very bothered. He was, we had knitted some hats and we had talked about it, and we had, taken pictures with our chemo caps on. But then when it actually happened, she had a really hard time looking at me. She wanted me always to have either a wig or a head cap on. And I remember fairly early on, I went to kiss her goodnight. She was kind of a top bunk, and I had a scarf on my head, and she pulled it off my head, and she just looked at me and she goes, "It's okay now, Mom." And so, it was like her little way of saying, "It's okay. I can look at you now. I love you this way too. You're still my mom." Like recognizing that you're still my mom, even though you don't have hair.
That's such a touching story. And for anybody who didn't make the connection, that's your sensitive one who buried her head in the blanket,
right,
when you first announced it. So, that really touches me to think of her saying that, especially because it feels to me like on another level what she was saying is, I can be brave for you, Mom. I'll be brave.
Right.
I'll look at something hard to look at for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And a blessing, because, as a mom, one of the first things you think of, I think, is, what if I'm not going to be here for them? Or what if they're not going to be okay when I get through this? And it was a little bit of a, Mom, I'm going to be okay, so.
Oh, wow.
No.
That's a moment. What was praying like for you during this time?
It was, that I will say, and I probably should have said at the very beginning, community is great, family is great, but I would absolutely not have gotten through without my faith. And I truly believe that all of those things, the community and the others, were a result of the faith of those people. And so I'm not a journaler. I'm not really good at sitting down and taking a lot of time to pray. But at that time, I often would just, if I was scared, I would just, repeat the name of Jesus. I would just close my eyes and be like, Jesus, 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 come to me, me. Because, I've come to believe in my life that I don't really have to name everything to Jesus that I'm praying for, because he already knows exactly what is bothering me, what I'm celebrating, just like a really close friend. Sometimes you don't need words, you just need to be in one another's presence.
Yeah.
So, and a friend of mine had told me, she was not a Christian, she was into an Eastern religion, and she said, you have to find your mantra. Here's a mantra. And I took a piece of that advice, because I said I do need to find something to focus on. But what I would say to myself over and over if I got nervous or worried was, I would simply say, stage 1 cancer, confined to the left breast. Stage 1 cancer, confined to the, and I would say, Jesus, stage 1 cancer, just to tell myself it's not a bad thing. It's a minor thing, It's
wow.
So and I continued to go to church, and that was always great. It was always very meaningful.
Wow. You've hinted to me that God showed up in some powerful ways during this time. what comes to mind, the ways that God showed up?
Yeah. My favorite way, because it's a little bit comical, and I've told every once in a while, I'll tell one of the faith formation classes this when they're talking about, is seeing Jesus or whatever, is I call him my Jesus minifigure moment, because that the mantra that I would say, it was Christmas Eve morning, and as I said earlier, I was the director of the Christmas pageant, which happens on Christmas Eve. So I knew that there were just a handful of people that knew of my diagnosis, and they were close enough that I had also told them that we didn't want the kids to know. But, people make mistakes, small town. So I was like, how am I going to get through Christmas Eve and be, do the pageant and get through all of this? So I was a little bit stressed, but I remember as I woke up that morning, I heard my mantra. I heard, stage 1 cancer, all in the left breast, stage 1, it's going to be okay. That I just heard those words, but I realized I wasn't saying them. And when I opened my eyes, I saw my little Jesus minifigure was standing on my left breast, like looking at me and, saying my mantra.
Whoa.
And it's funny because, you're sort of half sleeping, half waking, but you know that you're awake. It's like, I know I did not dream that. I know I'm awake. Oh. And it feels like that was several minutes, but I know it was really a nanosecond. It's kind of hard. People are like, well, how long, how many? I'm like, I really don't. I just know that it happened, and it felt like a long time. And just peace. I was like, this is perfect, So yeah, when he shows up. He comes big, or
Oh yeah. If he's gonna come, he's gonna make himself known. That is so amazing that he adopted your mantra, which is just so interesting because there's times that we say the words that he said. Will repeat, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit, or let this cup pass, but not my will, your will be done. We say, our Father who art in heaven. We say his words, but he said your words to help you get through it.
Right, yeah.
Whoa.
I think because I knew, I had been able to say them, but at that point, I probably had hit a high pressure point, and I had no word. And so it was like his kind of reminder that, here's your words. Come on, you got it. These are your words.
What a coach.
Yeah.
Get in the game. Get in the game, Desrosiers.
Right.
Get in the game. Wow. Tell me, I'm curious. Do you find that when you pray, is Jesus the one who you direct most of your prayers to? Some folks, when I chat with them about their prayer, they talk about the Holy Spirit most of the time. I offered this to the Holy Spirit. Maybe other people just use the term God, or maybe some would say to my Heavenly Father. Is Jesus the one who comes to mind first?
It depends on I think it depends on how I'm praying. I think probably mostly. I would say probably more than 50% is just the conversation with Jesus. But I feel like when I really want to be comforted, I do more, Father, I could see myself often sitting on God's lap as a small child, and then when I feel like I need strength, or I have to make a decision, I speak more to the Holy Spirit for, okay, make these, bring me the words that God wants me to say, so I guess it depends what I'm appealing, because I've come to know each of those, God in each of those ways a little bit differently. So.
Amazing. Yeah. That's beautiful. And it speaks to me about the gift of having, the Trinity having been revealed to us, that, to know that you do have those different ways of connecting with God. It's really beautiful. From where you sit today, looking back, How did that time of your life change you? How did having cancer affect you?
Um, I think I thought of myself as a person who believed that, today is all we have, live today, tomorrow's never promised. But as much as I think I had 2040 vision in that aspect, I think it brought my vision for tomorrow's never promised to like 2020.
Wow.
It sharpened it. It was like it really, like, now I know what that means.
Oh.
Tomorrow might not be here for me.
Yeah. That's a what, and that is both a burden and a gift, I think, because I wonder, does having had one doctor's appointment where they say, wait a minute, you expected to hear everything's fine, see you in 6 months or see you in a year, see you next, you heard, wait a second, Houston, we've got a problem. Mm-hmm. How does fear play a role in your life now differently, that you've experienced, something that was, you hoped and expected would be routine and it wasn't? What do you do with the uncertainty of having no power over that?
Yeah, I think I call it the big C shadow. And for myself, even as much as I feel like I trust God, and there's always that moment of every time you have to have 6 months follow, or every time you go for a routine test. And I know that I share that with many cancer survivors that I know, because, we often will text each other with, oh, today's the day for the oncology visit, and it's like, yep, I know what you're,
yeah.
So but you really have to keep your fear in check. And know that, fear, it's just not healthy. It's not helpful, but that it's okay it's okay that it's there, because you have had that experience. Just like if you've been, caught in a rainstorm without an umbrella. Okay. So it's okay to think, oh, I'm going to get wet.
Yeah.
It's a learned thing that, sometimes it's not always, it doesn't always come out the way you want it to. So
how do you think it changed your family?
I think I definitely know the kids at different times. I think they're more fearful of, I think most children who don't have a parent or someone close that goes through that, they don't really ever think about their parents' health, or if mom says she's going to the doctors, there's not really, but especially early on, whenever I said, oh, I've got to go to the doctors, I'd usually get from one of them, why? What's wrong? Are you okay? I think then, I had to keep myself in check, because I have to tell you that we as parents, especially when we're home with our kids all the time, when you get to a stressful moment in parenting or homeschooling, it's easy to say, well, you know what, maybe I'm just going to crawl in a hole and die and you'll never see me again. And I think it takes on a more harsh reality for kids who have actually thought about you dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. What are your favorite ways when fear knocks at your door, as it does for all of us in our own journeys? What are your favorite go-tos now for praying? What's your favorite way to connect with God at this stage in your life? Now that you've got kids, kids in their 20s, you've got teenagers, you're this many years beyond cancer. How do you connect with God best now?
I've always been an eclectic person. Jack of all trades, master of none. So, I've tried them all. I've tried guided meditations. I've tried the Rosary. I've tried, Lectio Divina. I've tried journaling. And for me, the best way for me is just to be somewhere alone, often with music that kind of gets me sort of, music is very important to me in my faith life. And I really just talk to God a lot. Like I have my prayer spaces right next to my bed, so when I open my eyes in the morning, it's right there. So I'll just start talking about, oh yeah, remember this one, remember that one, God, what are, But I do like to sit in front of the tabernacle. Adoration is important. I love Mass. So yeah, and virtual Mass is nice. It's great that it's an opportunity to have that. But I really can't wait to feel the real presence when I'm there with the family of God of our parish. So.
I love that. Yeah, isn't that true? Yeah, and I love it's really helping us to recognize that one of the main ways we experience church is the family of God. It's a major, major important thing for us. So that's yeah. Do you have a favorite song from church? Out of curiosity, have you picked the songs that are going to be played at your funeral like I have?
No, well, I have, but there's way too many of them, so I can't. So I'd have to. There's, and my husband is the music guy and the memory guy. I have a memory like a strainer; everything just flows right out once it goes. So as soon as I hear a song, I'll be like, it's going to be that one. I know I'm going to cry. Where's the tissue? But yeah, and there's one of my favorite singers is Matt Maher, and he has a few that are just. He has one that actually is As Good as It Gets, which is sort of like a, the gist of it is like God in your life is as good as it gets. Not meaning, it's not great. It's sort of, in the negative way, as good as it gets. It's just no matter what else is happening, whatever's falling apart, whatever's not good, you've got God. So this is as good as your life is going to get right here in this moment.
I love that.
Yeah.
And Father Pat Butler is a priest of our diocese. He's the pastor of the largest parish in the diocese up in Clifton Park. And I remember one of the times he said is, we can start experiencing heaven right now because God is already as present to us as God ever will be. There's no such thing as more presence than the real presence. Right. So if we can just relax into that, we are experiencing heaven right there. It's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And I think that's so exciting, which also kind of does say our distance away from heaven is only as thick as the wall is we've put up.
Right.
Which is pretty wonderful. Tear down that wall, Wow. Mm-hmm. You have actually organized your life in the past few years around your faith. Maybe it's fair to say you have long before that with homeschooling your children, but you actually now have a career in the church. And what would you say caused you to not be afraid that you would overdose on church? Because you're a real person. You're a real person. You're not somebody who likes to be real saccharine and soupy religious and real gooey. What caused you to want to devote yourself so fully to faith?
Right. I think I kind of always, once I made the major transition in my life and saw the power of what God can do to redeem us, but that's like stories for another podcast.
I'm all right. Did you hear that, everybody? She just said yes.
Then I always knew that I wanted to do something, and the fact that I married Bob, who always wanted to do something for the church, and I was able to be home with my kids and be a home church and be the primary faith person in my kids' life. I knew that was my mission for a while, even though I was a little antsy about, I want to do something. I want to kind of work and, be more, it just kind of fell into place that felt very comfortable. And so I'm not surprised, but then I feel like once you really feel God's presence in your life, I always joke about the Bed Bath & Beyond coupon. And, I, on social media and other things, when somebody has something like that 20% off Bed Bath & Beyond coupon, they just want to tell the world the great deal they just got, and they can't wait to share it. And who wants one? Does anybody have one I can get? And I feel like then I think my faith, I think God's presence in our life is at least slightly better than a 20% off Bed Bath & Beyond. And so I want to share that with people. And I just want them to be excited about that and know that, I've been in hard places and I've been brought out of those hard places by nothing short of, the love of God. It kind of just was natural.
You know what I want to say too that I think is really beautiful about what you just said? You don't want everyone to join this path because you found it and you're right, or you desire to be right about it, or I've got something you don't have, and come join the club. It's a much better invitation than just being right. It's this has changed my life, and I would not have my joy without this. Please taste some of this with me.
Right.
This food is better. This feast is better enjoyed with company.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
And I don't ever need to know who. I really don't want anybody to ever tell me, "Oh, I came to Jesus because of you." I like that. That does not matter to me. And one of the things I saw going through cancer was with the community outpouring, I realized how many people can be touched by your life and by your kids' lives, and that you don't even realize know you. Think about that when sharing my faith, that there's, I just hope that there are many people out there that at some point are like, oh yeah, and I'll never know that, and that's okay. That's okay. I don't ever want to know or try to give God a number of how many people I've, brought to Christ, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't change my faith.
Yeah.
But
yeah. That's beautiful. Well, and it's kind of, it's that image of the cup flowing over. There's almost no way to measure what flowed over. You just rejoice that there's such an abundance. It's like nobody's got their little gauge to see how many milliliters came out.
No.
But I can tell you that it's a lot. Christa, there are people who are listening to this who have no connection to you or to me. They have no connection to our church. They were forwarded this because they're going through a hard time. Maybe they've just recently been diagnosed with breast cancer or another form of cancer, or maybe they were forwarded this because they've been having struggles in their faith and someone thought this could help them. If you were speaking with someone who was in that, like you said, the pit that you've known, when you first found out that you had cancer, or even maybe it's a whole different crowd that had an inkling, had a nudge when you said, I knew that I wasn't on the path I was supposed to be on. What would you say to offer encouragement to them from where you sit in your life now?
What's the saying? Everything, in the end, everything will be okay. And if it's not okay, then it's not the end.
You got it.
And I know that somebody, that's kind of a meme that goes around or whatever, but, and really whether they currently have a relationship with God or not, I would, encourage that. One of the things I told myself I would do, because I knew when chemo was going to start and that I would start to get ugly, your skin looks terrible. People tell you look great, but you really look back at pictures and you're like, you guys were all lying because the hair was gone, the skin was bad. Every time I went past a mirror, if I looked in, I told myself that I would smile no matter how badly I felt, and just remember that God created that. Whatever that looked like at that moment, God created me. And it really, that was really pretty powerful at the time, because it just, I would walk away from every time I did that and go, wow, that's right, so.
That is huge. Just God created this, and if I can manifest this, I get to see a little bit of God's glory right now, right here.
Right.
Oh, Christa. I'm going to put that in my toolbox. I'd never had that thought before. And some days it is hard to muster that smile, and in a way it makes it all the more beautiful.
Yeah, there's many days through chemo. For many people, it's hard to get any kind of smile out, but...
Wow. Christa, before we conclude, just a couple of questions I like to ask everybody, because these are some of the deep thoughts that I think are being chatted about a lot of different places, and I think people would appreciate getting your take on this. Many people feel that their life is guided by the phrase, everything happens for a reason. Do you believe that's true or not?
No. No. But for me, I've thought about it a lot, because I did watch your YouTube thing when you talked about it.
Oh, thank you.
For me, if that phrase is true, everything happens for a reason. If God made this thing happen to me, so that I could get patience, or so that I could whatever, then to me that sort of negates the concept of free will in my life. I have free will to decide whether I'm going to have more patience or whether I'm going to make the next right decision. So if I say that, well, God gave me this flat tire to make me slow down, I'm like, well, no, because maybe it's not going to make me slow down. Maybe I'm going to jump in somebody else's car and get there quicker, because that's my free will to choose that. So do I think that everything, how we respond to everything can have a purpose and a meaning? Then yeah, it's, but the straight out, if we say everything happens for a reason, meaning God sends every circumstance to teach a lesson, or I don't believe in it from that perspective, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Good. That's great. Great response. A lot to think about there. Let me ask you, you've had to endure many things. In the midst of, even as we're interviewing right now, you are just a week into grieving the loss of a sibling who died. You lost another sibling and your mother last year. You've had to endure through a lot of challenges. What do you think, as you look back at some of the things you've faced, what is the key for you in enduring or persevering through hardship?
I think it can be summed up in one word, and that's surrender. Just surrender, and then start problem solving. But first you have to surrender.
Yes.
Because it can't, the serenity prayer, the wisdom to know the things, to know the difference.
Yes.
I can't change the fact that my brother, lived a very painful and ill life and left us too soon. I will never be able to change that. I'll never be able to change the fact that I hadn't spoken to him in a while, because we didn't usually. I can't change any of those things.
Yeah.
So what can I do that's productive? But yeah, you have to surrender.
It strikes me too. You are trained. You're a trained soldier for the U.S. Army, and you are trained to handle physical, earthly battle in one way. And yet, when it comes to the spiritual warrior in you, the answer is surrender.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
You've got to know the tactics that will work for what you're dealing with. And when it comes to the spiritual life, surrender is the tactic.
Yeah. Well, and I had a young soldier who, when you are a pretty male-dominated field and in the Army, and you're not generally surrounded by a lot of faith-filled people necessarily, or people who are willing to share their faith, I should say. And I remember having a soldier when I was deployed to Panama for Operation Just Cause, which was when Noriega needed to be removed from power. And we were getting ready to go out and come in contact. And I had a soldier who was, we would call him a Bible thumper. But I remember we were all standing there getting ready to go and locked and loaded. And he said, man, to pray. And I was like, absolutely, give us, send us off with some prayer. And I remember thinking he prayed that nobody was laughing at him anymore. They're like, wow. And everybody surrendered a little bit at that moment. Like this might not end well for some of us. And we need to surrender. So he really, that young gentleman taught me a lot about, bravery in your faith. Be willing to surrender, and then in the end, it's all going to be okay.
Oh, I love those words. Yeah. And if it's not all right, it's not the end.
Yeah.
Christa, what are you hoping for at this point? We're speaking in the middle of coronavirus. People might be hearing this years later, and they'll be able to tell us how this all ends up, but we don't know yet. And we have some fears about what it could turn into, and we've got some hopes. What are your best hopes for what life can look like when we, as a people, make our way through this challenge?
Yeah, I thought about it on two levels. I thought, personally, I don't think that my hope for life is different than it was before Corona. I just hope that I can live a life that points people to Jesus, and that, and for our world and culture, on a wider level, I think that my hope is that people will commit to keeping the things that they have acknowledged they really appreciated about being, segregated, isolated, quarantined, whatever the case may be. The people who are like, this is such a blessing to be home with my family more, such a blessing to not be wrong. I just hope that when this is over, I started making a list of things I will not give up, and when we reopen, I will not give up family prayer time. And it's something that we did when the kids were really little. We did more, and then we all got busy, and we were like, we both work at the church. We all go to Mass when we're supposed to. We do this, we do that. But we never really did family prayer time. And because it's my job, part of my job, I was like, we could start doing this thing on Facebook Live, or and really, I don't really know how many people watch it or don't, but it is extremely meaningful for our family to do that, and I want to commit to not stopping that when we don't have to do it any longer. So.
Yeah, I love it, and I'm very happy to say that I get to see from where I sit that you have raised children over the course of now 2 decades. You didn't, just like when you're kneading the dough, you don't know how it's all going to turn out. But as the dough has risen, we've seen you've raised children who really love Jesus. They do.
Today, that's what I tell people. So it's not like we can't rest on our laurels or give up or stop praying for them to continue that relationship. But I am very grateful that right now today, my children all seem to love Jesus.
Oh, wow. And I love that. One day at a time works for just about everything in life, including, it's so true. Like any relationship, we cannot take a snapshot and think that we know the whole thing always and forever. Relationships shift and change, and people go through stuff. So for today, you are grateful that they love
Right.
Jesus. They love Jesus today.
Yeah.
Krista, this has been a really beautiful hour. Thank you for the wisdom that you shared. Thank you for being willing to open yourself up. It's, I think anyone who knows staunch Germans knows that one of their great gifts is to be strong and to help us get through things. But often it's more challenging for someone with that culture to open up. You opened up so beautifully and showed us some things that we really needed to see and hear. And so thank you for the time. Thank you.
No, thank you.
And to all of our listeners, this might be a good time for us to just take a second before we depart. Ask yourself, what is it that God wanted me to hear from this conversation? What is going to stay with me? Was it something about the way that prayer came into Christa's life? Is it about role modeling or about praying for God to give you what you need and then having the openness to receive it? Was there something she talked about with her cancer or her losses that gave you hope or encouragement? Is there any part of this interview that's going to go forward with you? Is there anything from this that you want to share with someone else? Is there someone who came to mind during this time that you were listening to this podcast that maybe you need to forward this to because it's exactly what they need? So we close now, friends, and thank you for listening. We're grateful to Christa for her time and for your time in hearing these sacred stories. May God bless you all on your path forward.